New polling shows most Americans don't think former President Donald Trump should be given special treatment under the law, despite being a former president. In the latest survey from CBS News and YouGov, 87% of registered voters say the legal system should treat Trump the same as every American. That includes 80% of Republicans. In a different question, nearly half of all likely voters, 47%, say Trump won't play a role in who they vote for this November, 32%. Meanwhile, 32% say their vote will be in opposition of Trump, while 20% say their vote will be in support of the former president. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. Willie, we've seen a series of polls over the past week that show, in most of the polls, over half of Americans believe Donald Trump presented a direct threat to American democracy after the election, and also believe that he committed crimes. Now we're seeing 85% of Americans say that no man should be above the law,
including Republicans.
Including 80% of Republicans. It sounds like despite the craziness and the madness that we see from Trump quarters from time to time, it does appear that more Americans are lining up to the reality that Donald Trump likely is going to be facing some criminal penalties for January 6th, for trying to steal the election, for what he did in Georgia, calling the Secretary of State, demanding that he find 11,000 votes to rig that election, for what he did with the documents, a series of serious legal problems that he's going to be facing. And I think there's a growing understanding from Americans that he's going to be held accountable.
Yeah, and it's heartening, is it not, to see that 80% of Republicans still believe in the rule of law, whether it's Donald Trump or someone else, that if you commit a crime, there are consequences to that, even if you're the former president of the United States. 8 in 10 Republicans, as Mika just told us, believe he should be held to that standard, which just anecdotally is not what you hear on the street, that, oh, come on, the document thing, what we're hearing from Senate Republicans, by the way, as well, not just people on the street. The document thing was a housekeeping issue. It was a storage issue, trying to wave that away. Well, what the American people, almost 9 out of 10, are saying, Michael Steele, is no, that stuff is serious. And if he did it, he ought to be held accountable. And by the way, we're going to hear much more, Michael Steele, beginning tomorrow at a new hearing from the January 6th Select Committee. So all of these questions around the 2020 election will be top of mind again as we get closer and closer here to the midterms.
Really, this is such a significant movement in this narrative that Donald Trump, as we've seen going back to Mueller investigations, was able to manage, was able to divert attention from the main arguments that were being made against him. Now that I'm home in a very serious way, and I think largely because of the effectiveness of the January 6th committee, the combination of Letitia James and Georgia prosecutors sort of creating a pincer move narratively with facts and with a higher degree of evidence. That while a lot of people thought that the American people were sort of, it's summer, we're at the beach, who cares, No, they were actually paying attention. They were actually taking a lot of this in. And I think that's reflective in this polling, and so Republicans now have another narrative problem. While they want to be dismissive as this was just a storage issue with Mar-a-Lago, the American people don't see it that way. And so how do you narratively translate that so that you don't get on the wrong side of their attitude when it comes to the ballot box in 4 or 5 weeks? So there are a number of things that are playing out here with the committee the January 6th committee coming back in front of our television screens tomorrow. This narrative picks up. A little bit of hiccup with Denver Riggleman and his revelations about phone call records at the White House. But I think they're going to seize that narrative back. And this is going to proceed and really, I think, make for an interesting fall narrative relative to the campaign. Is if people continue to digest this in the way that they have so far, it will be interesting to see whether or not this weighs on their vote just a little bit more than you would think that they're saying right now.
So, Ann, after January the 6th, I thought you wrote a really important article for The Atlantic talking about attempting to bring some of these Trump supporters, some of the more extreme Trump supporters, back into the mainstream of American politics, back into involvement in democracy. We've been looking at polls over the past 6 months, over the past year, that show around the edges some Americans becoming more skeptical of Donald Trump. I'm wondering what you're seeing, some former supporters, I'm wondering what you're seeing now in these numbers that we've been discussing, and also just general attitudes of Republicans about whether we're moving in that direction or not, whether there may be enough Americans skeptical of what Donald Trump has done since the election. We have a majority now saying that he committed a crime, that perhaps what you wanted to happen is slowly beginning to happen around the margins.
So there's clearly a kind of hardcore that doesn't watch the January the 6th hearings, that dismisses them as illegitimate, that's very resistant to any kind of persuasion. But what the January 6th hearings did really well was use the language of Republicans, and especially of Republicans who'd worked for Trump, to tell the story. And this seems to have been a deliberate idea. They made Liz Cheney the center of the panel. She was one of the primary speakers, but also the interviewees, the clips they used, Trump's children, Trump's employees, other Republicans from Congress. They were telling the story, and because they are trusted messengers, or more trusted messengers, or could be trusted messengers anyway, for Republicans, it does seem that some of them were listening. This is a hard problem, how to reach people who are in a different information bubble, or who reject, who are rejecting what's being told to them by even media like this one, or maybe even particularly media like this one. And so finding ways to reach them is something that a lot of politicians should be spending more time doing. And I was really glad to see the January 6th committee took that into account. They were trying to write the story. They were trying to tell it in a way people could understand. And as I said, especially using the language of people who'd worked for Trump himself. And that was an attempt to reach people who would normally not listen.
Well, and you know, Willie, what I always tell my friends who will generally talk about the mainstream media, I say, read the Wall Street Journal. It's owned by Rupert Murdoch. Read the editorial pages of the New York Post. They will, I won't agree with what they say all the time. But again, look at some of these Murdoch things. Look at if you're talking about how the election was rigged, even go on the website of Fox News and see how they reported the election. It's not like you have to go if you don't want to come to this network, or you don't want to go to CNN. You certainly can get media outlets that, again, are controlled by people who have a very conservative worldview. And even, especially the Wall Street Journal, the news gathering side of the Wall Street Journal is as good as any media outlet in the world. And so there are those options, but some people are just lazy. Some people just want their prejudices and their pre-existing beliefs reinforced. And so, they'll look at Facebook pages that are sent to them by conspiracy theorists, or they'll go on to crazy websites that are run by third parties who have absolutely no credibility at all.
Well, you just put your finger on it. The people who want to have their views confirmed will find that confirmation somewhere, but there's no excuse for not having the facts. There are all those places you just described. January 6th committee meets again tomorrow. We'll carry that live on MSNBC, of course, coming out and for the first time with a hearing in 2 months.